Andy Nowicki, AltRightNovelist.com. Yesterday I was in the middle of reflecting upon Solo, a Star Wars story, another rather lackluster Disney Star Wars film, product of the Disney Star Wars anti-canon, I would call it. And and again, I categorize all of the films that have been made under the Star Wars umbrella by Disney, including Rogue One, which I liked. It's the one of the four that I liked. But I include it as well as the other three as part of this anti-canon, and I'll explain that in a minute. But or explain what I meant by that in a minute. But I was in that video yesterday. I was in the middle of talking about my thoughts on the movie and how it caused me to reflect further upon the entire phenomenon of Disney Star Wars, and how ever since George Lucas gave up the helm of Star Wars, it hasn't been the same. It has lacked this core of auteurship, if you will. Now, it sounds like I'm praising George Lucas as an auteur, but I'm not praising him necessarily. I mean, I do think at his best, he's really good. And of course, at his best, he changed my childhood, for the better, and that of many other boys and girls my age and, around my age, as well as those who are older and those who are younger. Captured our imagination and really put us on a certain course, imagination-wise. I think that Star Wars was was maybe the most formative, imaginative, what am I trying to say here? What word am I trying to use? Imagination-oriented elements of my childhood. I think definitely movies played a large role for me. I was a cinephile from early on. Star Wars was one. I would say Raiders of the Lost Ark was another, and there are probably others as well. But those are probably the big two. Whether I felt compelled to go out into space and explore Strange New World, although that sounded like Star Trek. I was less of a Trek kind of person, but I liked it as well as a kid. But it was really Star Wars for me. That was what it was all about. But so whether it was all about going to space, fighting the bad guys, and in space battles, and meeting cool, weird aliens and going on adventures out in the galaxy, or whether it was exploring in the jungle for hidden fortresses and fighting off treacherous characters who want to do evil with these what am I trying to say? These archaeological figures of great power, like the Ark of the Covenant and whatnot, and the stones, whatever they were from the Raiders of the Lost Ark sequel, Temple of Doom. Those were the two formative elements for me of my childhood, I would say. And so all of that was a lengthy aside, but it's just to more or less reinforce that George Lucas at his best was great. But me calling him an auteur isn't just praising him all around. It's saying at his best he was great, at worst, well, he was bad. But he's still, his author's imprint can still be found on these these movies, in the writing, in the direction, in the characters, what have you, the storylines. So the original 6 Star Wars movies, the first 3 definitely, episodes 4 through 6, Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, of course, those are everyone, just about everyone agrees those are the golden years for Star Wars. Then the prequels came in the late 90s and early aughts, and a lot of people were not crazy about them, and I was well aware that they were not what the original trilogy was, quality-wise. But I still felt like they were legitimate Star Wars movies, and I still was excited to see them. Every single one of them I was excited for, because it was like a return to this world, this galaxy far, far away, that was so familiar to me, so thrilling for me. And so these original movies that all either were directed by Star Wars or had his very strong, because, you know, let's face it, George Lucas was, probably still is, a control freak. So even the movies that were not directed by him were basically directed by him. I'm sure he had the final say on everything. Nothing happened that didn't get his thumbs up on. But then, when he sold the rights to Disney, and Disney took over with the Star Wars franchise, then Lucas didn't have any say anymore. They could, well, I was going to say they could go over his head, but they didn't even, his head didn't even figure in to the mix at all. They could just do whatever they wanted, because they had the rights to Star Wars now. And that's what they've done. And, you know, for better or for worse, mostly for worse. So these new movies have never felt like Star Wars to me. And that is most egregiously true of the 2 movies that were the continuation of the Star Wars saga, episodes 7 and 8. Those 2 in particular really, you know, I saw them and felt spectacularly, I don't know, their mediocreness, their lack of really anything that reminded me of the legitimate Star Wars that I knew and loved. It was something that I could not ignore or dismiss. And that was true of Episode 7, The Force Awakens, but it was even more true of Episode 8, The Last Jedi, because The Last Jedi was really in your face about, you know, being an anti-Star Wars movie. It was supposed to be, its whole shtick is pretty much, you know, we're flaunting your expectations, and aren't we clever for doing that? And we're taking your icon, Luke Skywalker, and, you know, raping him before your eyes. And this is for your own good, because we're deconstructing this movie, because, you know, the makers of this movie are deconstructing the whole genre, because we're cleverer and smarter and more insightful and really better than you, you stupid fanboy. I mean, that was the attitude that they exhibited, and this is what people disliked, particularly about The Last Jedi. And when they responded by voicing their displeasure, the representatives of Lucasfilm, which no longer has anything to do with George Lucas, because he sold off those rights. So the representative of Lucasfilm and of Disney just always reacted unsympathetically, and worse than unsympathetically. They more or less taunted the people who were expressing their dissenting opinions on these movies, and called them racist bigots and sexists and Trumpian troglodytes and all the standard stuff that is really just, I mean, in addition to being spectacularly unfair, it's just rhetorically lazy. I mean, how many times can they go to that well? How many times are they willing to go to that well? You don't like this? Well, that's just because you're racist. I mean, you know, normal people with no stake in the game, I'm telling you, they, you know, this is the boy who cried wolf for them. You know, the people who do this kind of stuff, you know, who seem like they're somehow beyond any kind of repercussions because they're morally superior. They think of themselves as morally superior to everybody else. They feel like they can do it however much they want to do it because they're righteous, and that and their righteousness justifies their behavior. But typical people, you know, not necessarily people who are dissenters themselves, they're aware that this is, you know, this is something like the boy who cried wolf, and that calling people racists has become somewhat of a joke now. Calling somebody a racist for just about anything, you know, you don't like this, well, that means you're a racist. You know, if this is something done by a liberal leftist type, by an establishmentarian left type, and you don't like it, that just means you're a racist, you're a sexist. I mean, this is kind of, this has become a meme. This has become a humorous trope that gets mocked out there. And yet the people, these again, those who constantly sling hurl these invectives and these insults, sling these insults, just somehow feel that they are immune to being criticized. And I think there's something in the entire attitude of what do I call it? I've called it something like this before. The Disney industrial complex. I mean, we're talking about people who have loads of power and who have all adopted what the proper ideology of the day, favored by the elites of the day, is. And so so they respond to being criticized not by defending their craft, not by saying we respect your opinions, but here's why we did it this way, or you know, or saying, yeah, you might have a point about this, that, and the other thing. But no, their response has always, just about always been just to say, oh yeah, well, you're just a bunch of idiots, you're just a bunch of racists, you're a bunch of aging white males, and you're just living in the past, and so nah, you dumb bigots. And this has lent the Disney industrial complex this, it has given them this kind of sheen of somehow being immune, feeling themselves to be immune, that they don't even have to try to have a good relationship with their fan base, which you would think would be what any astute businessman or businesswoman would know, that if you're coming up with a product, and you know, there are people who use the product and people who like the product, and it changes their lives, and they love it, and they talk about it constantly. These are people, you know, doing you a service, and you want to do them, you know, you want to show that you appreciate them. You don't want to just respond to them challenging you when you go in a different direction by saying, you dumbasses, you're living in the past, clinging to your guns and to your religion, you know, all condescendingly. But somehow, because the Disney industrial complex and all that they represent, because they somehow think of themselves as impervious, and I guess to us, in a sense, they must really be impervious, because, I mean, they've got all the money in the world already, and I mean, I guess that when you ascend to a certain level of power, you don't really have to have contact. You don't really have to be fair to the people who got you there, because you can just do what you want and tell them to screw it, to screw off. And that's not a great way to behave, but unfortunately, the feeling that there's no repercussions to their behavior is what is the most vexing, I think. And that is the reason why, when I purchased a ticket to Solo: A Star Wars Story, because when I went to see Solo: A Star Wars Story, I purchased a ticket for another movie, and then went in to see Solo: A Star Wars Story, just because I wanted to, in my small way, and I know it doesn't make any difference at all. My .0001% of my funds, which went to fund the makers of, or went to buttress the profits of the movie that I chose to buy a ticket for, which was Isle of Dogs, which I do like. Instead of it going to Disney, I know that doesn't make any real difference, but the fact that I did it just was representative of how I wanted to send a message in whatever way I could, that I didn't want them to get my money, and I was going to cheat them out of my money, you know, because I just don't like this arrogant, holier than thou, I know more than you do, you're just stupid and bigoted if you don't like our new direction kind of attitude. So, and it seems that a lot of people feel this way. And, you know, the backlash to The Last Jedi, they tried to ignore it in the media, and they tried to dismiss it in the media, but they couldn't. They couldn't ignore it, they couldn't dismiss it, they had to address it, ultimately. And the way that they addressed it was completely graceless, as I've said. But the fact that they chose to address it at all shows that it made a dent, it made an impact. And the fact that Solo: A Star Wars Story, which isn't nearly as bad as The Last Jedi, as far as, you know, egregiously trashing the franchise or spitting on the fans of the franchise, or raping the icon of the fans before their eyes, like The Last Jedi did. It's not nearly as bad as that, but it still is, you know, as a product of Disney Star Wars, it still is suffering the consequences for the behavior of the executives of Disney and of Lucasfilm. And hopefully there will be some consequences for this. Hopefully some of these rich, powerful, self-righteous, smug, cultural Marxists at Disney and Lucasfilm, you know, are going to get the message that they can't just go on doing whatever the hell they want and not caring that it's not ultimately going to be a good look for them. It's not going to profit them very, very well over the long term to behave in this manner, and so something needs to change, and hopefully something will change with Solo flopping as it is. And in a way, it's unfortunate that Solo has to be the film to suffer in this way, because it's far less egregious. As I said, there's some things about it that are a little annoying, but as far as SJW-esque content, there's not really nearly as much. It's just kind of a bland and not very inspired movie. It's I would say my second favorite of all the Disney Star Wars films, but I would say that, which with Rogue One being the first, and then The Force Awakens, and then The Last Jedi being on the bottom. But it's, I would say that, like all of those other films, and this is what I was starting to talk about before I kind of went off in a different direction. And I think what I said while going off in a different direction expressed something that needed to be said, even if I wasn't as articulate and was a little bit more rambling than even I usually am. But hopefully I wasn't too fumbling and inarticulate, hopefully just a little. But I think I'll end this video here and cover what I have to say about Solo, a Star Wars story, and what I have to say about how it exhibits this this non-Lucasness that I want to, that distinguishes the Disney Star Wars movies from the original 6 movies of the Star Wars saga, over which George Lucas played a role. My name's Andy Nowicki. Please check out my work at altrightnovelist.com.